Good morning. I want to welcome you. I hope someone's watching online. Looks like we are good. A couple of announcements as we get started. First off, as far as an update for us, all of us are doing very well. Becca is certainly doing well. More stir crazy than really anything else. But Lord willing, by Thursday, Friday, I think actually Becca gets to be done sooner than the rest of us, which is odd. But that's just the way things are working. But anyway, so for those interested, we're all doing very well and looking forward to being done with this. As far as the girls' trips, I don't know if everybody has heard, but we'll kind of give a synopsis. Obviously, they were not able to go on their trip. The airlines are able to use the credits from the flight that got canceled to use for a different flight, but that means any rescheduling would have to be to South America or a destination of the airline, which only goes to South America. And so there's several trips yet this year, or otherwise next year. Just not sure if those credits last for a whole year or how that works. There was another trip scheduled here in about a month to Cusco, Peru, which would be cool because I've been there. Really, it is probably the most cultural city I have ever been to. In fact, all of the souvenirs I got from Peru came from Cusco, including Inca Cola and my hat and blanket and all those other things all came from, and my little panpipe, whatever that is, Anyway, it's just an amazing place. It's about 45 miles from Machu Picchu, which is, I believe, if it's not one of the seven wonders of the world, it should be. But by train, it takes 3.5 hours, if I recall. And if you go by car, I think it's over 4 hours to go 45 miles. That'd be like taking 4.5 hours to get to Peoria. But it's an amazing place. Well, that trip also has been canceled because of COVID. And so we'll see what happens for them as well. Only other announcement, or more of an announcement and a discussion, of which there's nobody here to discuss. So keep this in your mind if you want to text or message, or we can discuss it next Sunday, Lord willing. Reverend Bob would like to give us a report. July 21st, which is a Wednesday night, he will be in Altona. Since neither Bob nor us have evening services at this point, the whole splitting the day won't work this year. And so my brother Bob has Reverend Bob scheduled for July 21st on a Wednesday night. We have options. We could either see if any of us would like to go to Altona on that Wednesday night and kind of do a combined report. Then he only has to make one trip and head back home. Or the other option would be is if we wanted, like we did last year, have my brother Bob record the service, and then we could watch it either in the service or just at our convenience. Or thirdly, we can obviously schedule him, but that would require us to then have the hot lodging and the food and all those other details all to ourselves. I'm kind of leaning towards, if there's enough interest in people going Wednesday night, we go Wednesday night. For those that can't, we could share my brother's video, and we could watch it at a different time. But it certainly, this would be a year, and it seems like every year we say that, but of all the years, this would be the year that you'd want to get an update, because there's been a lot of, I think I could effectively use the word ridiculous things that have been passed or working on being passed in our state, and it would be good for us to be updated on all of that. And so if you're thinking along those lines, let us know if that Wednesday night would work for a service there in Altona. I think their services are at 7, so it won't be done until 8 or thereafter, if that makes any difference. But that'll be July 21st. I don't know that we have any other announcements. So as far as prayer requests, which, since there's very few people here, don't have a lot of those here in person. I don't think there's any updates on our app. We do have one. Was that Pastor Sheedslog? Yes. Pastor Sheedslog, he was one of the pastors we had after we were married, outside of Watertown, Wisconsin, not far from Maranatha. He is having some pretty extensive rotator cuff surgery tomorrow. I think they have to cut his bicep, just remove it or separate it, and then tear off part of the bone and patch everything back together. And it sounds pretty extensive. That surgery is tomorrow, so we could be praying for. His name is Roger Siegelog, Pastor Roger Siegelog. So that'll be taking place tomorrow. But other than that, yes. For AJ, he obviously signed up for the embassy duty. That is 1 year of training and then 2 years of service. And then because of that, he had a 5-year contract. So he has 2 more years after his 2 years of embassy. In November, he will be done in Jerusalem, and Lord willing will be coming home potentially for a few weeks. I think he'll be planning on being here for a week and then maybe in Wisconsin visiting some friends for a week. And then just this last week, he got his orders that he will be stationed in North Carolina, which unfortunately the Marine base in North Carolina is coastal, which is cool, but it's swamp. And so it's just humid swamp. And of all the options that he could have gone, he frankly had North Carolina at the bottom of the list. And that is where he wound up being assigned. We're not too upset about that because of all the options. That is by far the closest option to go visit him. And so that would be a cool on our part. We just may not do it in the middle of the summer. When it's hot and very humid in that area. He has been spoiled because obviously all of his training previous was in either California, which is pretty moderate, or he spent much of the winter in Washington, D.C. area, which is obviously was cold. But then Turkey and now Jerusalem are very moderate Mediterranean climates, and so he hasn't had to deal with even the heat and humidity that we're dealing with this weekend. He hasn't necessarily had to face for 3 years.
Our walk to Washington, D.C. was
Oh, that's true.
last heat.
Yes, when we were there in D.C. before when he graduated, it was very hot there at that time, and humid as well, very humid. But that was the last time he's ever had to face that heat and humidity, and starting in November. Now, granted, the advantage is he comes back in November, so most of the heat and the humidity should be gone, or at least not as repulsive as it will be the following summer when he is there. But anyway, update there for AJ as well. I don't know that we have anything else. Anything back there? All right, let's start with the word of prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you again for your goodness. We thank you for your hand. Certainly we oftentimes don't always understand why and when and where, but we thank you that you are always in control and doing something far beyond our means, far beyond our even mental capabilities, and we thank you for that we can have the confidence in that. Certainly you pray that you be with Pastor Seedslog there in Wisconsin as he goes for the surgery tomorrow. Sounds very extensive. I just pray that you'd certainly give the rest and the health that he needs in the next 24 hours or whatever it may be, but as well that you would give him a good recovery. It sounds very extensive, and I believe that they're quite concerned about it. I just pray that you give them a peace that passes all understanding, and for the road that is yet ahead, that you'd iron out the speed bumps and certainly just continue to remind them of your very presence there with them, and we thank you for that. Certainly you pray for AJ there in Jerusalem and all the details and the climate, the military climate, the political climate that he's in. I just pray that you would certainly continue to protect him and the others that are there as well. And for the other requests that are on our screen, certainly continue to pray for Nahum, and certainly I believe he should have been returned home this week, and all those details that certainly you are aware of. I am not, but we just ask that you would certainly continue to work out those details as only you can, and we thank you for what you'll do. And certainly for the girls' trip and the hope that it'll be rescheduled, let us pray that in those details you would orchestrate those as well, and we thank you for the fact that you were not surprised by any of this, and you will continue to guide and direct and provide as only you can, and we give you the glory for that. In Jesus' name, amen. Before we have special music, one more I should have said in regards to the girls' trip and its rescheduling. As far as the home office, or my understanding of this organization, is willing and perhaps even the word would be eager to get them rescheduled, but because it has to be to South America to use the plane tickets, the lady that's kind of oversees that is actually on this trip this week, and for the most part unreachable, and so they have to wait until this trip is done here on next Saturday, and then probably a couple of days, I would imagine, for her to get recuperated and caught up with rest, and then at some point they'll be hearing. So if you text the girls this week, they won't know anything, probably, until sometime next week as far as what will happen there. But now we have special music. Very good, thank you. As a update from last week, I mentioned on Sunday that kind of as a prayer request that I had a lot of tasks to get done for my class, and spent pretty much all Sunday afternoon and evening, and for the most part all of Monday, except a couple of hours of eating and about an hour at the cemetery for the services there. But the rest of the day until well into the evening, I spent working on the projects. Got those done on Monday, and the final taken on Tuesday night after work, and completed the class. Still waiting for all the grades and all of that, which could take several more weeks. But since last March, classes have been every 8 weeks. Every 8 weeks they finish and the next one starts, and I have a 4-week overlap to get all the projects done. So the first half of the next class involves 2 classes, and for the first time, well, since last March, I had last August off of school, just how it overlapped. And then since the end of August, I have not had a weekend off of school until this weekend, which was a little bit of an adjustment considering that we also were quarantined. And so for the first time since August, I have no homework to get done this weekend. And we really can't go anywhere, at least not in public. And so that makes for a very strange adjustment as well. I just sit there thinking, I should be doing something. What is it I should be doing? I should be reading something. I should be writing something. I should be doing research. And nope. But our topic here this morning is to go back to Numbers chapter 26. Yeah, kind of the title as we're thinking about our thinking. There are going to be times in our life, ironic that this would take place this week after the change of circumstances for my daughters this last week, but there are going to be times in our life when things just don't make sense. Why did this happen? Why is it happening now? Why did these details all coordinate to this extent and then kind of a curveball thrown at the last minute? Why does this happen? Many years ago, when the Savinskys were here for a week, and for many years they were here every week, or they were here every week. They were here for a week every year. Oh boy, I can't imagine every week. That would be something. But they were here for at least a week every year, and in one of those years, I think it was like 10 years that they were here every year. One of those years, Brent had picked up a phrase in a southern drawl, and I have no idea where he got this, but he would say, "Well, that don't make no sense." Just pretty much just like that. And I don't know where he got that phrase. Could be another goofy friend that he has, or a movie. I don't know. I think there's something similar to that in what's that somewhat military movie? I just forgot. Tom Hanks. Forrest Gump. Yeah, I think there's something similar to that, and I guess that wouldn't surprise me if with that southern drawl that it would come from that movie. But I don't know if it's an exact quote. But anyway, Brent, as we often do, in fact, we did it a couple weeks ago, we would spend time in our living room and we'd solve all the world's problems, or at least point out all the world's problems. And in that year, for an entire week, every time we would discuss something that seemed awry, what I'd hear from across the room was, "Oh, and so that was kind of our ongoing hilarity for that week. But the truth is there's a lot of times in life that don't make no sense. And how do we respond to that? And what are ultimately our excuses that we make, our statements that say, I can't do this, our statements or conclusions in our mind that say, I give up, simply because we can't make sense of what's taking place around us. And so before we dive into this passage here, in fact, we're going to go through chapter 26 and then the first 11 verses of 27. But before we do, let's begin with the word of prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you again for your word. I pray that, again, you allow me to decrease, that you alone would increase. I pray that even while there are some sitting at home watching this, I pray that they be challenged by your word, and just that you would be able to direct our steps accordingly. Certainly for each one of us, there are always going to be those times in our life where things just don't make sense. And as our minds begin to run ahead of us or run ahead of you, I pray that we be able to slow down, that we learn how to wait on you, that we learn how to trust in you. And we thank you for what you will do as we do that. And as we look at the illustration here from this chapter and a half, I pray that you would challenge us in regards to, well, how often it takes place in our life as well. And that we'd be able to be honest and humble enough to examine our own response and figure out what excuses we might be using to remove ourselves from what you have for us. And we thank you for what you will do. In Jesus' name, amen. A teacher was given a note, speaking of being confused and a day behind. A teacher was given a note in regards to an absence of their child, and the note said this: "Dear teacher, please excuse Harriet." It's always Harriet. "Dear teacher, please excuse Harriet for missing school yesterday. We forgot to get the Sunday paper off of the porch, and when we found it on Monday, we just thought it was Sunday." I wish that would have happened at one point when I was growing up, but that never did. Harry Truman is credited with this statement: "If you can't convince them, confuse them." I don't know if he actually said that or if that's just what he's credited with. I don't know any details of what he did as far as to live that out. But another story is told of Harry Truman, which I thought was quite hilarious. He's credited with telling a story that apparently he often said to many of his friends and more personal gatherings. He would tell this story. A man was hit hard on the head at work, so severe that he was knocked unconscious for an extended period of time. The family, obviously very heartbroken, attended to his medical needs until they were convinced of the reality that this man had died. And so they called the local undertaker to come pick up his body. The next morning, this man awakes from a coma, and he sits up in his casket. Confused, he looks around, kind of blinks a couple times, rubs his eyes, and begins to think to himself. And he says this to himself: "If I am alive, why in the world am I in this soft satin-filled box? And if I am dead, why do I have to go to the bathroom?" That's compliments of Harry Truman. I guess that would be funnier if there was more people here to laugh. Maybe it wouldn't be funny even if they were here to laugh. I don't know how that works. But here's the thing with God. God is never confused. God is never surprised. He is never taken aback by situations, by scenarios. It is we who are confused. It is we who are a little overwhelmed at times. For instance, for my daughters, I was amazed at how quickly they raised their support. That was a lot of money. I was trying to figure out how I could raise about $4,000 in 1 month's time. That would be wonderful. They raised a tremendous amount of money, and certainly for all practical purposes, it seemed that God was certainly in this. But why then, after 16 months of COVID being around, why the week before their trip or the weeks before their trip would it reach our family? Things that, again, well, that don't make no sense. There are times that life just throws curveballs and we don't understand the whys. And this next chapter in 11 verses, a lot of it is, I'm not going to say the word genealogy, as the book of Numbers is. This is a chapter of Numbers as they do another census. And I'm taking some liberty in these statements, but as we step into their shoes while all of this is going on, I can imagine some excuses that they would give, because it would be excuses that we have given in regards to why is this happening, why now, why here, and why us. And so this morning here, very quickly, in the normal very quickly way, I have 4 points, 4 excuses that we make when life doesn't make sense. Or to repeat Brent as the title of this message, well, that don't make no sense. Now, our first point here in the first 4 verses, and it came to pass, this is Numbers chapter 26, came to pass after the plague that the Lord spake unto Moses and said unto Eleazar the son of Aaron the priest, saying, Take the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel, from 20 years old and upward, throughout their father's house, all that are able to go to war in Israel. And Moses and Eleazar the priest spake with them in the plains of Moab by Jordan near Jericho, saying, Take the sum of the people from 20 years old and upward, as the Lord commanded Moses and the children of Israel, which went forth out of the land of Egypt. And then from this point on, and I'm not going to read these verses, I will summarize them in the next point, but we have every son of Jacob and their descendants being accounted for in the rest of this chapter. But what I find in these first several verses is this argument. And again, we don't see it in these 4 verses. But if I were living in these 4 verses, this is the excuse I would give. And I would think it would be an excuse that perhaps many times we have all given. It's the reality of, hey, we can't go into battle like this. We can't do this. We see the timing is right after a plague. We know that the plague, this has been quite a month since we were last here in Numbers, but recall that they were camped outside of the Midianites and Moabites. They had combined because of battle, they had combined. And recall that the blessing was given to the nation of Israel as opposed to a curse. And thereafter that blessing was given, the children of Israel, the men of the children of Israel began to pursue after the women that were involved undoubtedly with the prostitution involved with the polytheism that would have taken place there. And if you recall from this last chapter, one of the guys even brings one of the Midianite women down into the camp, and Eleazar then grabs a spear and kills them both. And a plague was stayed, but in that time frame, I believe it was 25,000 men were killed as a result of that plague. And so as we begin verse 1, the timing is right after the plague. We have just lost 26,000 people, and now we're going to have a census, as God says, to go to war, to go to battle. Again, not typically the best time to go into battle right after a plague. But secondly, look at the purpose that they go into battle. In fact, we have to go back to the last chapter to see this. Chapter 25, verse 16 and 17. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Vex the Midianites, and smite them. What was the purpose for the census? Well, it was to figure out how they were as far as the numbers go. Recall, God already knew their numbers. They did not. And we'll get to more of that in the next point. But what the purpose of this was because God had commanded them. God had told them to go to battle. Hold your finger there in Numbers chapter 26 and go back to Numbers chapter 13. If we go all the way back to the spies going into the land, and recall 10 were bad, 2 were good, to come back and say, hey, we can do this. God can do this, is literally what they said. The other 10 were not so excited about the ordeal. Let me read these verses. Numbers chapter 13, verse 25 says, And they returned from searching of the land after 40 days. And they went and came to Moses and to Aaron and to all the congregation of the children of Israel unto the wilderness of Paran to Kadesh, and brought back word unto them, and unto all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him and said, We came into the land whither thou sentest us, and surely it flows with milk and honey. And this is the fruit of it. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled and very great. And moreover, we saw the children of Anak there, and the Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast to Jordan. And Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men that went up with him said, We be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than us. And they brought us up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, The land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof. And all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And then there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants. And we were in our own sights as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. Chapter 14, first 10 verses say this, And the congregation lifted up their voice and cried. And the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, and the whole congregation said unto them, Would God that we have died in the land of Egypt, or would God we have died in this wilderness? And wherefore hath the Lord brought us into this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to return to Egypt? And they said one to another, Let us make a captain, let us return into Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel, and Joshua the son of Nun, and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were of them that searched the land, rent their clothes, and they spake unto all the company of the children of Israel, saying, The land which we passed through to search it is an exceeding good land. If the Lord delight in us, then he will bring us into the land and give it us, a land which floweth with milk and honey. Only rebel not against the Lord, neither fear ye the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their defense is departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Fear them not. But all the congregation bade stone them with stones, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of the congregation before all the children of Israel. And we know then that the Lord would announce through Moses that a judgment was about to fall on them. For the next 38 years they would wander until all of them that were above the age of 20 were dead. Now we've concluded those 38 years. In fact, undoubtedly, some that have just died in that plague, the 25,000, 26,000, I forget what the number is, undoubtedly were the very last of those descendants, or not descendants, of those that were there at this time, murmuring and complaining, desiring to raise up a captain, and desiring to stone Moses and Aaron. They are now all dead. But here's the question that I would have. Again, this is not found in the passage. This is just a question that I would have had, and I would have to dare say others would have had at that time frame. If they learned anything at all from 38 years ago, would it not be simply to trust God? As Joshua, who is one of two, Joshua, Caleb, and at this point Moses, are the only three still alive from that time frame, beyond the kids that were alive, obviously below 20 are still alive. But as far as the adults that were over the age of 20 at this time frame in 38 years ago, they're the only three that are left. Certainly they and even their parents have reminded them again of what happened as they stood on the borders of this land, as they had this debate between 10 men and 2 men. And certainly if they have learned something, or at least maybe not learned it, been taught something, maybe they're still in the learning process, as we all sometimes take longer to learn what we've been taught. But they certainly have heard before, because Moses himself has said this, we just need to trust. Now, in my mind, if I'm trying to learn how to trust God, and in the past experience that did not fare well for them, it was a measuring of here's who they are, here's who we are, and God judges them before considering that instead of just trusting him. In my way of thinking, to then be told to do a census to go to battle, I've got to be thinking in my mind, well, isn't that pretty close to what we were doing? Aren't we then trying to put our trust in ourselves, in our numbers, in our might, compared to who they are? Should we not just trust? In other words, I would have to say that in my personality, I would have been one to say, no, we shouldn't be doing the census. Obviously, God's the one that called for it, but in my mind, I would be the one saying, I don't think this is a good idea. I don't think this is what we should be doing. I think we should just go. God, in the last chapter, told us to go vex them, to smite them, to destroy them. Let's do that. If we've learned anything in these last 38 years of wandering, it should have been when God speaks, we do. So why do we take this time to do a census? What difference does it make how many people there are? It is God that is going to give us the victory. And a lot of times, even though it was God that commanded this census, I think there's a lot of times that we may find ourselves in an argument with our God, disagreeing what he's called for, simply because in our mind, that doesn't make sense. In our mind, it seems to contradict the lesson that we learned last time. Why aren't we being held to the same thing this time? Why are we being taught a new lesson for the same scenario? Here we are on the borders of the land. We're about to go in. We've been told to go in. Why aren't we just going in? Instead of debating it like we did last time, why aren't we just trusting? Now, again, that's not recorded for us. We do not know that they had anyone. We don't know that they had any Art Nutzhorns there saying, wait, time out. Why are we doing this? Why should we be doing this? But I can say in our own lives, there are undoubtedly times that we begin to argue with God, and while it may not actually be for going into battle, we will say, hey, we can't go into battle like this. We just need to trust. And I'm not sure why God is asking me to do this. instead of just trusting him. And I think the scenarios of when that applies are unlimited in each of our lives. But what a interesting scenario that they fall into. But then we begin in verse 5, and I'm not going to read this. This goes from verse 5 to verse 51. We give an account of all of the different tribes. Ultimately, not only just the tribes falling from the sons of Jacob, but as well the clans. And so the main leaders and family breakdowns in each of those tribes. And so we have all those listed, ultimately for the sake of time and ultimately for the sake of pronunciation. I'm going to skip those, but here in a moment I'll show you a chart. But our second point, we have no one left. There's who's among us is still alive, ready to go into battle? Again, we don't have this argument being stated for us, but I'm just entering into their shoes, where they have been for the last 38 years, what they have been seeing for the last 38 years, and I've got to think that there were at least some who could have concluded, now isn't the time for us to go and smite and vex, as we were told in this last chapter, the Midianites, because we don't have the numbers that we should have. Recall 38 years ago, everybody that was alive, 20 years old and older, as far as the men, as far as the warriors, as far as the soldiers, have been killed. Besides Joshua, Caleb, and Moses, even Aaron now has passed away. Besides the three of them, there's obviously nobody older than 58 years old, as far as male. As far as the wise and the elderly stature of wisdom, they have nobody except these three guys, and perhaps the 19-year-olds that were alive at the moment when they first entered as spies into that land. It's now been 38 years later, and they're now the oldest ones. That's the seniority that they have. Besides the fact, when you consider how many have died. Let me put up a chart. This goes back to Numbers chapter 1. But look at let's look at the first column here for Numbers chapter 1. There's 603,550 able-bodied men of battle in Numbers, counted in Numbers chapter 1. 603, because I don't believe that Moses was counted in any of the tribes. But Joshua and Caleb undoubtedly were. And so ultimately we can say 603,548 have died in the last 38 years. I think I have this on the point here. That equates to 43 people a day. And that's just of the men. Certainly we're not counting at this point the women and even children that have been killed through not only the plagues and the battles and the things that they've already faced. It is estimated that 1.2 million of them have died in the last 38 years. 1.2 million. When you look at that number and you consider this number, and you consider, I think we are somewhat, what am I trying to say? Because of COVID, and we hear these numbers repeated to us, and how many people have died, and how many people have had it, and how many people have been tested, and all of that, I think we begin to grow a little callous to the reality of the extent of numbers. But when you are part of a nation that is a traveling nation, all following one man, and this is not like us following the president, this is us walking through the wilderness for 38 years, following after this man Moses and before his brother Aaron. For 38 years, we have buried, if 600,000 is 43 a day, you double that, as they're guessing 1.2 million people have died, you're looking at 86 funerals per day. Of all of those that are older, of all of those that are capable of battle, of those that have the wisdom and maturity of age, 86 on average per day have died. They literally have just lost what was it, 25,000, we could say the day before, whatever the first verse says, after the plague, whatever that time frame is. They just lost 25,000 people. Of all times to consider a battle enterprise, in my mind, I've got to think to myself, this is not the time. Case in point, I forget what it is now. I think I wrote it down, 500,000. How many people have died from COVID in our nation? I think it's around 500,000, just a little over 500,000 people. That's a tremendous amount of population. Now, statistically, that's still pretty small as far as the total population, but that's a lot of people. That's a lot of funerals in 1 year. It's a lot of families that have been impacted, and I'm not going to get into the argument of whether all of those truly were based on COVID, because we know that that's probably not the case. But you know what we aren't being told in the midst of all these numbers? From reports that I have read, that we are also, I think also because of COVID, we are in a baby boom. You know, I have not heard anybody, except in very rare cases, mention how many babies have been born or are about to be born in this year. I would dare say probably more than the 500,000. I'm not discrediting those that have lost their lives and the families that have been impacted by that. But sometimes it's easy because you only focus on, it's easier to focus on the sorrow than it is on the joy, if you follow with me. And so if I am one of them, I'm stepping into their shoes here this morning, if I am one of them, what am I focusing on? The reality of death. The reality of 1.2 million people dying in the last 38 years. The reality of, in the very recent past, 25,000 people being killed because of the plague. When I'm considering God calling us into battle, my mind goes to who we don't have. And recall that God already knows their number. Why did God have a census? Well, we're not told the exact reason, but here's my conclusion. Because of this chart. Numbers chapter 1, 603,550 able-bodied soldiers are accounted for in the 12 tribes. Well, technically 11 tribes because Joseph is split, Ephraim and Manasseh. An interesting study, if you want to do on your own, just do a study on the heritage of Ephraim and Manasseh. That's fascinating. But that would be a whole different sermon, or maybe even a whole different sermon series. But nonetheless, so on this list chart that I have, there's technically only 11 tribes because Joseph is counted twice. Oh, that's how it was in both censuses from Numbers 1 and Numbers 26. But if you look at the chart, some of the tribes are very close. Take for instance, Reuben, 46,500 to 43,730. That's not a huge difference. Now, Simeon, the very next one, that's a pretty big, that's less than half is remaining from what they had before. Gad as well, not a whole lot of change, although definitely a decrease. Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun all had increases. None of them huge, but certainly offsetting some of the ones from above them. Ephraim had a modest, that's a percentage-wise, that's a pretty decent percentage. It was about 20% there, decrease. Manasseh had nearly doubled. That's quite crazy. Benjamin had a very modest increase. In fact, that's a good 30% increase there. Dan had a very small percentage of an increase. Asher had a pretty decent increase. That's probably about would that be about 25% increase? And Naphtali had a pretty substantial decrease. But notice the total number at the bottom. 601,730. Again, what is it that we focus on when things are going on in our life? By nature, what is it that we focus on? We focus on loss. What we fail to focus on is the gain, the blessing that God sends our way when we're not looking. And what I think is the reasoning for this census is to remind the people, yes, you just lost 25,000 people. Yes, you have lost potentially 1.2 million people over the last 38 years. But what you may not have picked up on until the time of this census is you are only within, 1,800 people from where we were 38 years ago. Still a smaller number, but a pretty inconsequential smaller number. You know what I find fascinating on two sides of this coin, what I find fascinating about our God is there seems to be times that God takes the time to remind us that he's been at work, even though we haven't acknowledged that he's been at work. When God takes the time to remind us that he is still at work in our lives, even though we've been consumed with that which is the difficult part, there's been a blessing that has been in store, kind of going on silently behind the scenes, that the 603,548 men that have died in the last 38 years, God has now replaced. This number 601,730 that are now being counted, that is the number of able-bodied men ready for battle. Only God could do that. And I don't believe that the census had anything to do with God's knowledge, because he already knew this. I think it had everything to do with these people needed to be reminded that God was still working in their midst, even in the midst of judgment, even in the midst of sorrow, even in the midst of loss. These ultimately are all orphans and grandchildren of orphans, or children of orphans. What a reminder that God is still doing a work even when we don't see it. The argument could be, well, we have no one left. We've had a lot of loss. I can't imagine, what is it like burying 24,000 people in a single day? Can you imagine burying 24,000 people and then God saying, literally as they are burying them, God saying, now go vex them and smite them? But wait a minute. I just buried Dad and all of my uncles. I just buried Grandpa. I just buried the big strong guy next door who really could have helped us out a lot. We just buried him. How can we go to war now when we've lost so many already? But before God actually sends them across the border, he takes the time out and has them count themselves. And I believe it is simply for that very reason, to remind them, hey, I'm still here. I'm still working in you and through you. And while you're only seeing what you've lost, let me remind you of what you've gained. And I think those are still the reality of many times in our life today, that our God is doing a work behind the scenes, and that's putting us on pause at times to say, hey, I know there's a lot that you've lost, but let me show you what you've gained. The census. Again, you can read through all those names, you can read through all those numbers. I gave you that chart, sums it up for you. No names involved except for the sons of Jacob. Jumping to verse 52 then. We come to the third point. We aren't quite there yet. We're not to that point. What's the old phrase, counting the chickens before they're hatched? Boy, we're often told to be very cautious in that regard, to kind of not be so eager and energetic to jump before we're told to jump. But look at verse 52. The Lord spake unto Moses, saying, unto these the land shall be divided for an inheritance, according to the number of names. To many thou shalt give the more inheritance, and to few thou shalt give the less inheritance. To every one shall his inheritance be given, according to those that were numbered amongst them. Notwithstanding, the land shall be divided by lot. According to the names of the tribes of their fathers they shall inherit. According to the lot shall the possession thereof be divided between many and few. Great verses when you consider the promise that God is giving to them, that he had already given to them, but reminding them, I will give you this land, and it will be divided among all of the tribes, and every family shall have an inheritance of a land that they're not going to have to purchase, of a land they're not going to have a mortgage on. It's a land that God is giving to them for every tribe, every clan, every household. What an amazing promise. But let's step into their shoes. Where are they? They're 24,000 people in the red as of the last week. And they've been told to go into battle into a land, this is still the same land, that has men that are giants, that are men that are mightier than they, that have all the Amalekites and the Hittites and the Jebusites and all the other ites that inhabit this land, God is telling them before they go into the land to conquer it, he is telling them, as you have counted all these tribes and the clans within the tribes, so will that land be divided up before you. Now that's God. God can say that. We should be hesitant in saying things like that. But as I step into their shoes in that instance, there would have to be times that I would say, whoa, 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 whoa. We haven't fought a battle yet. We haven't won any land yet. We haven't conquered anyone yet, besides the one battle they've already had, with that exception. The truth is there are times when we hesitate in our faith and our trust before God simply because we say, whoa, we aren't there yet. I don't think that God is ready to do this yet, or I don't think I am ready to do this yet. Now, there are times in our life, Philippians chapter 4, verse 19, that we've come into verses like Philippians 4:19 that are promises to us, but it's hard at times for us to acknowledge we're ready for this now. Philippians 4:19 says, but my God shall supply what? All your need according to his riches and glory by Christ Jesus. The end of this verse makes it very clear that the checkbook is ultimately, you can sign blank checks here because the checkbook is unlimited. It's according to his riches and glory by Christ Jesus. But the first part of this verse says, but my God shall supply all your needs based on that checkbook. Now, how many times when we look at the word all your need, how many times do we find ourselves in situations where we hesitate to trust that God will supply all of our needs? We do have to be cautious. These obviously, in the context, these words were spoken to a church, the church of Philippi, that obviously had administered to Paul in his great time of need in the midst of their own poverty. And so though that promise is given not necessarily generally to everyone, but it is being stated to a church that is already given generously in the midst of their own poverty to support the work of God. And so we have to be kind of cautious in just jumping into, hey, that applies to me as well, although I do not hesitate to say that our God does still continue to supply our needs today. But I can say this. How does that verse equate then, or apply then, to the diagnosis of cancer? But my God shall supply all your needs. How does that apply to foreclosure? When you're losing your house. But my God shall supply all your needs. But wait a minute, how does that apply when the bank has just posted a letter on my front door? How does that apply to being unemployed, which may be connected to the foreclosure? How does that apply when I can't, or I don't have a job? Now today, it seems like everybody is hiring, and nobody can find enough workers today. And again, we could get into the politics of that, but that's a whole other message. But there have certainly been times when we've probably all have faced those unknowns in employment or unemployment. But my God shall supply all your needs. How does that apply to our great financial needs when it seems to have reached well beyond our means? But my God shall supply all your needs. You see, there are certainly times in our life where we say, like they certainly could have said, hey, we're not quite there yet. Yeah, it's great to think about dividing up this land for all of us and everyone in every household getting part of the land. But we haven't even crossed the border yet. We haven't fought a first fight yet. We aren't quite there yet, Lord. That's no different than God saying, here's what I'm promising you. You just need to follow me and you need to have faith and trust in me. And we hesitate and say, but wait, I don't think I'm there yet. I don't think I can trust that yet. I don't know if I could jump into that promise yet. The excuse that we have when life doesn't make sense. Well, that don't make no sense. Lord, I'm not there yet. This is overwhelming, and I'm not sure how this is going to be worked out. Again, another great verse, Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for good. There are going to be times, same scenarios, in the midst of cancer, in the midst of foreclosure, in the midst of unemployment, wait a minute, God, time out. I'm not seeing how this is going to work out that way. God says, hey, I'm going to divide the land between all of you. You just taking a census, you know how many are in every family, every clan, every tribe. It's going to be divided amongst you. The larger tribes are going to get more land. The smaller tribes are going to get smaller amounts of land, but it's going to be equal among all of you. But you haven't actually fought the battles yet. You don't actually own the land yet. You haven't conquered the land yet. But God gives the promise, it will be yours. You just need to go. Same scenario applies to us today. Last argument, chapter 27. First 11 verses, let's see if I can read these very quickly. The statement of, what about us? Have you ever felt out of the loop in God's plan? Hey, what about me? Again, not to keep picking on my daughters, but certainly they're part of a face group in regards to this trip, and so pictures are coming out. And one of the things that Caitlin really wanted to do, she thought it would be kind of fun, and preparing to be on the cross country. I keep wanting to say track. The cross country team at Maranatha. She thought it would be very cool to go for a run in Peru. Well, sounds like a group of them were sent out a message to the rest of the group saying, who wants to go for a run? I guess the best of the backstory, we told her, hey, this is Peru. This is somewhat of a communist third world a nation. You're not going for a run by yourself. You're not going to do that. It's not like Toulon where you just run a couple of miles around town or out down the bike trail and you return home. This is Peru. You're not going to be able to go for a run. Well, here, one of their first days, a post is made. Who wants to join us in going for a run? Oh, man. What about us? What about me? And I know that we've all had those scenarios in our life where it seems like, have you ever seen God blessing somebody else and you're kind of left waving a flag? Lord, I'm still here. What about me? Why is this not working out for me? Well, look at chapter 27, verse 1. Then came the daughter, and I still have to have some names here. The daughters of Zelophehad, the son of Hefer, the son of Gilead, the son of Meshech, the son of Manasseh, of the families of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, and these are the names of his daughters. And there's 5 of them. One of them is Noah. I found that very interesting. Mahala, Noah, Hagla, and Milcah, and Tirzah. And I'm certain I did not say any of those probably correctly. And they stood before Moses and before Eleazar the priest and before the princes and all the congregation by the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, saying, Our father died in the wilderness, and he was not in the company of them that gathered themselves together against the Lord in the company of Korah, but died in his own sin and had no sons. In other words, our dad has died. There's only 5 of us, and we're all girls. Our dad didn't die because of rebellion like Korah, or from what just happened, obviously, recently, when 25,000 people died because of the Midianite women. They were pointing out our father died because basically he doubted, he followed the advice of the 10 instead of the 2. And so he's died in the wilderness over the last 38 years. Verse 4, Why should the name of our father be done away from among his family, because he hath no son? Give unto us therefore a possession among the brethren of our father. And Moses brought the cause before the Lord. I think that speaks volumes about Moses. Here's a situation. Moses could have just jumped to a conclusion, but instead Moses goes before the Lord. Verse 6. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, These daughters of these Zelophehad speak right. Thou shalt surely give them a possession of an inheritance among their fathers' brethren, and thou shalt cause the inheritance of their fathers to pass unto them. And thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If a man die and have no son, then he shall cause his inheritance to pass unto his daughters. Verse 9. And if he have no daughters, then he shall give his inheritance unto his brethren, unto his siblings, his brothers. Verse 10. And if he have no brothers, then he shall give his inheritance unto his father's brethren. In other words, then his inheritance goes to his uncles. And if his father have no brethren, then he shall give his inheritance unto his kinsman that is next to him of his family. And he shall possess it, and it shall be unto the children of Israel a statute of judgment, as the Lord commanded Moses. Now there's an interesting reality in all of this, and to give you a little backstory, several years ago, at work we got a marker board, a huge marker board that we put in one of our conference rooms at work. And John occasionally will have training lessons for us, and he calls it the enhanced learning environment because he's able to scribble on this marker board. Now, to give you more of a backstory, John writes like a doctor. He scribbles on this board, and not a single one of us knows what he just wrote. But it makes John feel better because he wrote it, even though none of us can read it. And so our enhanced learning environment actually is an enhanced struggle for the rest of us to figure out what was it that what did you just say there? we cannot read this. But anyway, several years ago, one of our first lessons in this enhanced learning environment with the marker board was about beneficiaries and life insurance and trusts and all of that. And these verses here, these first 11 verses, reminded me of that enhanced learning environment. So I emailed John and said, hey, I'm asking you for some sermon background help here. What are those two details? And he answered my question, but he said I have to credit him. So this is because of John Leeser that we have this information. And he was obviously joking, but nonetheless. There are two ways of a beneficiary, kind of two broad ways. One is per capita when you're talking about a beneficiary. In this regard, it would be like this. If my parents would pass away and leave an inheritance for us 4 boys, myself, my brother Bob, my brother John, my brother Dave. There's 4 of us. Because of inflation, because of the out-of-control spending that our government is doing, perhaps our inheritance is, we'll just round it to $10. So all 4 of us each get $2.50. Well, what happens, though, if before my parents die, I die, or one of the other 4 of us? Per capita, as far as beneficiaries goes, means that there were 4, so each getting $2.50. Now there's only 3, so now you're each getting 3.3333333. And so because of the death of one of us, the others get more. You see how that goes? That's per capita. Perhaps the more fair way, but the more argued way is per stirpes. And for the same scenario, my parents leave an inheritance for us of $10. Inflation has been hit very hard. And I have passed away. And so my 3 remaining brothers are each getting originally $2.50. Per capita, they would be jumping up to $3.33. On and on it goes. But in per stirpes, it has that idea that now my descendants split my part of the inheritance. Otherwise, my inheritance would get nothing until later. And so now my brother Bob gets $2.50, John gets $2.50, Dave gets $2.50 of our great $10 inheritance, and each of my 5 children get 50 cents. Now, kids, don't spend grandpa's money all in one spot. So each of my 5 kids get my $2.50, and it gets divided evenly between them. Now, in my estimation, the per stirpes is the ideal way of doing this, because obviously if I have died, well, let me say it this way. If I have lived, if I were still alive, I would inherit my dad's money, and barring me spending all of it, all $2.50 of it, when I died, then my kids would then inherit ultimately the proceeds of the inheritance that I gained, whatever was remaining, which obviously if it's only $2.50, there probably is nothing remaining, but nonetheless. The disadvantage, though, is that my brothers at that time may be greedy, and what they're going to be saying is, why do Art's kids get part of our inheritance? Ultimately, Bob, John, and Dave are getting less, because with my death, they get more. Per stirpes, they get less, because more have been added into the equation. You see how this is working out? So when these 4 or 5 daughters come before Moses, they have a valid concern. Ultimately, their dad's heritage is gone because he's dead and he has no children. So the clan is gone. There is no clan for these 5. Ultimately, unless they are married, they have no possession of this land. So they come before Moses and say, hey, what about us? What I find fascinating about the Lord's answer is not only does he say, yes, indeed, they do get a possession of the land, but notice what God does in the verses that follow after that. And if the same scenario would happen where he has no sons or daughters, it goes to his brothers. And if he doesn't have brothers, it goes to his uncles. And if he doesn't even have uncles, it goes to his kinsmen. Who obviously, if there aren't even uncles involved, there's going to be a man that is going to be overseeing the estate. And so it goes to this person. I love the fact that although today, probably most attorneys will, if you went to them and say, hey, I have a choice. I can either do per capita or per stirpes. Which one should I do for in my inheritance? I would dare say majority of attorneys today would say, do per capita. Because the other one is always going to find itself in court because the other children, the other descendants are always going to argue it. And that's typically how it works. My brother's children should not be getting my inheritance. He's dead, he gets nothing, we get more. And because of greed, that always ends up in court, and it winds up being expensive, and families get divided. And so I think that the general consensus is go per capita. It's just easier, and there's less fighting. Why? Because we're greedy. Why? Because we want more, not less. And Brother Bob may say, why does Josiah get part of this money from his grandpa instead of me getting more from my dad? If that makes sense. Me, speaking of Bob. Well, you know what we see here in these 11 verses from our God? Our God is concerned about even the little person. Our God is concerned about even the little person. What about the guy who has no sons or daughters? What about the guy who has no sons and daughters and no brothers? What about the guy who has no sons and daughters or brothers? Where does this money go now? God has this all figured out and illustrates to them that even the smallest incidental detail God has orchestrated. Is it possible that any of these scenarios played out? It's probable. It's possible, especially when you've lost 1.2 million people. But I find it fascinating that God was concerned about even the smallest person. How often in our lives do we say, but what about me? Whoa, here I am. Do you remember me, God? I'm going through something here, and it seems like you're blessing them over there, but I'm really going through something here. What about me? We kind of wave our flag saying, Lord, I could use you here. If we gain anything else from chapter 27, I hope it is this. God is concerned about even, and I hesitate to say because this is our own terminology, the small person. But I hope that what we can realize here is there is no small person when it comes to our God. And what a blessing that is. Well, that don't make no sense. We're going to have those times in our life. Well, that don't make no sense. But may we be reminded that God is concerned about us. Even when we feel rather insignificant, we have to be reminded that God has given us promises even before we stepped into the land. We just have to follow Him in faith. We have to be reminded that there are things that God is doing in the background that we may be overlooking because our minds are consumed with the loss, that we fail to see the gain. And we might be able to say, well, that doesn't make any sense, God. Sometimes God puts us on a timeout to show us, hey, wait, but look what I have done. Look where I am working. And there's certainly going to be those times as the first point where, wait a minute, God, I thought before you told me. Have you ever had a same scenario repeat itself in your life? I can't think of one specifically. But where something has taken place in your life, it has been a big struggle, and God taught you a lesson about Himself, about our obedience, about who we are, about what we should do. And so we learned that lesson and we did it. And then maybe a decade later, we face almost the identical situation. What is it that we assume then? Well, I've already been here. This is what happens. This is what I need to do. And there are times, have you ever had that confusing time of, that don't make no sense? Because what God is calling us to do now is different than what He did The lesson we need to learn in the exact same, nearly the exact same scenario is different today than it was 10 years ago. Why, God? Why do this again, and what else do I need to learn? Well, we need to remind ourselves that our God is always even at work in those. There are going to be those that don't make no sense times, but we have still got to trust. Let's pray. Dear Lord, we do thank you again for your word. We thank you for, well, even a census, a lot of numbers and a lot of names. Well, we thank you for what it means, how it can apply to us as we consider the excuses that we give when life doesn't make sense. I pray that you be honored as we follow after you. In Jesus' name, amen.